just to go down here and just introduce themselves.
I'm Spiros Papas, a European from Greece, based in Brussels, lawyer. I have worked at the Commission, I have worked in the Netherlands, I have worked in my country, and I am also busy with issues pertaining to the Internet.
Hi folks, I'm Dr. Rachel OConnell. I am the Chief Safety Officer of BIBO, a VP with AOL, and I was invited here to speak about the social networking task force at the EU level that produced the EU Safer Social Networking Principles, and it's an honour to be here.
I'm Mark Wadsworth, and these bright lights remind me of when I was a TV presenter, so thanks for that, Graham. I'm the editor of thelatest.com, which is the UK's first dedicated citizen journalism website, and we broke the story about the cyber stalker being the sort of media terrorist, really, against Graham, his wife Irene, and their daughter. And it saddens me, really, that having spent the best part of 25 years in media, that my colleagues in Fleet Street and broadcasting, apart from Woman's Own and Sky, or one of the Sky channels following our lead, have actually singularly failed to follow up this very important 21st century crime as a major story. And I noticed that Graham, in the introduction to the programme, talks about a world with borders but cyberspace without borders. The fact that there isn't legislation to tackle a very evil individual who has terrorised Graham's family is appalling to me, and it's a campaign that I promise you that the latest will continue to pursue with vigour until that individual is brought to justice.
Hello, my name's Tim Watson. I'm the head of the Department of Computer Technology at De Montfort University. And the reason I'm here is because I'm also the head of our Computer Forensics and Security Group. So I guess I'm the token academic. Thank you.
You might be the token academic, but you're not the token person from Leicester. There's two of us today. Yay, Leicester. Okay, my name's Josie Fraser. I'm a social and educational technologist. My interest and involvement in being here today is around my work on behalf of ChildNet International for the DCSF, looking at providing guidance on cyberbullying for UK schools. That came out in 2008, and more recently than that, we've produced cyberbullying supporting school staff information that covers things like basic digital identity management, engagement online, things that teachers and other school staff would, can use to engage positively with the internet. I also do quite a bit of work around social networking services and the kind of educational and social potential of those services.
Josie, while you've got the mic, just save it going up and then back again. I know that you've been taking copious notes today and we're sticking to the formula before we switched it. I wonder whether you could just reflect on what you've heard today from your observations and your background, and let us know whether you found any gaping holes in our information today.
I will do. Yeah, I've been. I've really enjoyed. I've really enjoyed today, and I did take the panel title probably a bit too literally, because I was sitting there thinking, well, actually, okay, how can we synthesise what's come out of today? What have we been talking about? Where are we? Very clearly, the positive and critical impact and use of technology has come across through all of the panellists, and the importance of technology, and hasn't been understated by any of the panellists. I think we're all we're at a point now, probably socially, where we understand that technologies aren't going away, that banning, filtering and blocking as a protective response is a limited response. We've covered the kind of, I think, was very well illustrated by the case studies today. We've covered the importance of understanding the social and emotional impact of issues. I think it's very easy for everybody working in this area to talk at a very abstract level about the issues of harm and safety, but it's very important that we actually bring it down to what those impacts on individuals and their families are. We've talked about the importance of industry and technical development and engagement, and there's been some fantastic stories and some really interesting projects and processes going on that I'm sure everybody here will be wanting to keep an eye on. And I think one of the things that's been highlighted too is the context of the pace of technological change and progress, and in terms of actually what people are doing online, what services are there, how people use the web and the services that they use, the ways in which they use. Very interested in the last panel, obviously we're talking about location-based services, which is going to be a big deal for everybody working in this area. We've talked about those things, but we've also, I think, really what's critical today, and this kind of slightly more nebulous, is actually the critical importance of remembering the scope and the diversity of what digital safety is. One of the panellists before said digital safety is not just child protection, and no, it's not just child protection, it's a lot more than that. It in fact impacts everybody in our community, and it is a responsibility and an interest, or it should be a responsibility and interest to everybody in the community. What do we mean by digital safety today? We've basically talked about a range of issues. They've included sexual predation, bullying and harassment, harmful and illegal content, commercial and financial and systems risks. I think one of the interesting things that's come out for me, and one of the areas that I focus on in my work, is the tension between public and private that lots of the speakers today have referred to. And I think as we move into much more of a mainstreaming of participation in a social web, and I think one of the aspects that illustrates that very neatly is the overtaking recently of communications based on social networking services, overtaking email communications recently, and the ways that people are using the web to create content, to share content, to communicate with each other. As that is mainstreamed, the tensions between the public and the private and how we interact and how we approach the web is going to be critical for our children, for our teachers, and for us as individuals as well. The EU Kids Online report that came out last week talked about, it ranked giving personal information as the highest risk incident out of those kind of risk categories. And we have this on the one hand, but on the other hand we have a situation where being able to engage with the web is increasingly critical in personal and professional, developmental and networking terms. So there's a huge range of issues around that area that we need to get look at and we'll continue to develop. The areas of risk that weren't addressed today, particularly I thought, were issues of uneven risk. All children and adults are not equally at risk. We do know from the research that children who are already suffering forms of abuse or having multiple difficulties or difficult lives, and vulnerable adults are more at risk and much more likely to take high risk, engaging in high risk activities online and in their online interactions. So I'll kind of wrap up with that. The other thing that I think we haven't really talked about is we didn't talk a lot about positive modelling and the importance of digital mentoring, peer-to-peer modelling for young people. I think is really critical in this area, and that would feed back into really what one of my main interests is, which is our national and international digital literacy agendas, and looking at engagement with tools, processes and practices, not just as an e-safety issue or a child protection issue, but actually as a social and citizenship issue.
Thanks, Josie. I'm just going to keep moving it along a little bit, and then we'll ask some questions from everybody else. Tim, Can you just give us a quick rundown of some of the sort of technologies and tools that can be used in terms of fighting some of these new crimes?
Okay.
Particularly in the area of the things that you're teaching at your university.
Right. Technology is fantastic. We've heard about this. It's liberating and empowering. But we've also heard that it can be terrifying as well. It seems to solve an awful lot of problems for people. So perhaps technology can spring to our rescue yet again, and we can come up with a technological solution to the problems that we've heard about to do with paedophiles being online, the sorts of problems, cyber stalking that we've heard. Well, network security experts will tell you that there is a solution. It's really easy. Across the world, we've got computer networks passing packets of information. And each packet of information contains either benevolent or malicious content. So all you need to do is to stop the packets with the malicious content. And there's a joke that technologists use of flipping the evil bit, that what we have is a little bit of information, and you just look, and if it's a 1, it's an evil packet, so throw it out. Otherwise, if only things were that simple. The trouble is that we're talking about being safe online, being confident to go into this new, strange city. And confidence is the key. It's not only the key for us, it's the key for the con artists too. What we're dealing with is we're all hicks. We're all hicks from the countryside coming to a new city, trying to find all these wonderful things that we've heard about and trying not to be conned along the way. Trouble is, we're not wandering around the city outside and then going back to the safety of our hotel rooms. We're wandering the city already in the safety of our bedrooms, of our living rooms. We feel safe and secure. And when somebody invades our privacy, when they take advantage of the confidence we have and the feelings of security, that's when the trouble starts. Now, we're looking for technological solutions, but this is difficult, and perhaps I can identify one particular example of why it would be difficult. And one of the things that I can almost certainly do is to get into Graham's computer. He's probably not patched it that recently. If he has, if he's using a Mac, which I spotted, I know of a number of Mac vulnerabilities. I can probably remotely, completely compromise his machine and then start running software on it. Software that Graham knows nothing about, including that, a web server. So I can host a website maligning somebody else. Now, I'm going to clean up all the logs, all the traces that I've ever been on Graham's computer. And when we talk about the legal redress, the ability to chase people across continents and be able to track them down and punish them and stop them doing what they're doing, what we're actually talking about is probably doing that to Graham, because he wouldn't be able to show necessarily that it's anyone other than him who's running this website. Now, what computer forensics experts do in law enforcement is they're specialists at this. There are at least 2 cases that I know of fairly recently where completely innocent people were facing the prospect of going to prison because they had child porn on their computers. And it was the only reason that they didn't do that was because there were some very good forensic investigators who were able to show that actually it was a Trojan, it was some malware put on this computer. They ran it, they didn't realize what they were doing, and as a result of that, somebody was controlling their computer and using their computer to store their child porn. That's a very difficult problem. It's a difficult problem compounded by the fact that many paedophiles will use the Trojan defense as a reason why they've got porn on their machine. So we're faced with this problem that technology is liberating us, it's empowering us, but it's also putting it at risk. We'd like to have technological answers, but an awful lot of the problem is that this is a human problem. This isn't a problem that you can solve by necessarily coming out with a new bit of software, although everything that we can use is going to be of great help. So I think that's the answer, that it's a difficult problem, and if it were easy to solve, then we'd be solving it.
Thank you very much, Tim. Sorry that we've have to compress our time slightly because of the timeline of the afternoon, so we've only got 15 minutes to go through now. So I would ask you just to, if you could just keep your answers fairly short, just so that we can sort of capsulize the rest of the afternoon. Apologies for that. Mark, one of the areas that you and I both know because of the circumstance that my family's been in and you have helped by breaking the story is the lack of response in terms of the media in really exposing some of these cases for fear of litigation and so on. And so in a way, it's ironic that a citizen journalism site is using the web against the web. I just wondered whether you, as a long-standing journalist and television person and a person that broke this, could you comment briefly on your views on why the media these days are just too scared to run stories?
Well, all sorts of changes have gone on in media, including that phenomenon of no win, no fee in the legal arena. And colleagues tell me that because that's available, someone like Peter Dean Rickard, and I name him, who has been responsible for terrorising your family for 5 years, they fear printing his name because even though he doesn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, he could probably managed to get hold of about £500,000 worth of free legal advice to sue a national newspaper. Now, the advantage of a website like The Latest is that, apart from the fact that we're hosted, I don't know, are we in Malaysia now, Deborah, or the US? It doesn't really matter. We're not UK-based. And we travel light. So we're a bit like sort of David and Goliath. We can do more than Goliath. We can actually be a sort of media guerrilla force and attack the parts that big media aren't prepared to attack, and that includes cyber stalkers like PDR. And we can take him on, we can put his face on the website, we can name him, we can produce all the evidence that shows that he is responsible for the cyber stalking that he actually denies. And, this is a story that we can break that others fear to touch. We were talking to the Attorney General, Baroness Scotland, not so long ago, after our coverage, our groundbreaking coverage, actually, of the G20 protest. Do you remember? Deborah, my deputy, was actually kettled for 6 hours by the police. That's a controversial legal tactic that they use. And the Attorney General said, oh, well, mobile phones now are part of the new democracy. Everybody has a camera now and can actually use it to scrutinise the forces of law and order, like the police, if they misbehave. And so I think we very much welcome the advantages that we're given as a small outfit to actually make the news, to produce scoops, and to be a part of this process, this liberating process that my colleague talked about, which means that we can break the stories that big media don't. Watch this space.
Thank you. Rachel, you've, in your role at BIBO and in connection with the rest of the industry, been working and responsible for the safer social networking principles for the EU document. I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about that for those who aren't familiar with it, unless there's something else particularly you want to talk about.
I can mention that, and I'd advise anybody who's interested in seeing the good practice guidelines, if you Google EU Safer Social Networking Principles, you will get access to the actual document. These are good practice guidelines for social networking companies, and interestingly, you will also see links to each company's self-declaration about how they've implemented those recommendations, and it's very reassuring and it's very interesting to go there. And the European Commission is going to monitor the implementation of those principles. So from around, it's probably going to be October, November, there will be an academic and somebody who will look at the self-declaration process and see how each company has implemented the guidelines. So I'd recommend go to Google EU Safer Social Networking. And then I realize we're short on time. I'd also like to highlight a number of events that are happening. On the 4th of July, there's the Tomorrow Festival, which is happening in London. It's bringing 800 young people together, aged between 16 and 24. And if we're looking for where we're going to find the answers to these issues around digital safety, I think The event is going to bring together these young people who are tasked, who are socially active, techie kids who are going to think about and consider and exchange ideas about how they're going to shape the future. And that includes issues around digital safety. On the 7th of July, there's a conference that I'm involved in organizing called Online Social Networks, Agents of Change. And really what we're trying to do is work with the Prime Minister's coalition to address the issue of how do we bring about change, and how can we effectively harness social networks to bring about positive social change and enhance young people's lives. And one of the issues for us is how do we get support organizations? If you're a vulnerable young person who might be targeted by bullies or predatory pedophiles, as we mentioned earlier, typically what happens in that cycle, what happens is that there's a vulnerability the young person has which the other person exploits. Now, in the real world, you have organizations that you can go to, but not everybody knows. So if you're somebody who has an eating disorder, their dad is going to prison, they're being bullied in school, and somebody has a knife and they're threatening with them, who exactly are they going to call? Where are they going to get the support? So part of the solution to those issues is to encourage support organizations to have their services readily accessible from within a social networking environment, and to think about and change the way they operate, because often getting accessibility, often it's these organizations are inaccessible. Who would you? I mean, think about it. Who would you go to? What's the organization that you go to if your dad's going to go to prison and you're worried about being bullied around that? There are some fundamental questions that we need to ask the pro-social industries to say, what are the performance indicators that you are working toward? And do you actually meet the requirement to be accessible to all of the young people in the UK who may present with a lot of issues? What plans have you got in place at a strategic level to ensure that you refer, if you can't address the issue that the young person is presenting with, do you refer them to people that have the expertise to do that? And I think that this is a new area. There's a potential revolution in terms of how those support services are delivered to young people. And I think young people, 16 to 24, are the group that will be demanding answers to those sorts of questions, but also providing some of us with the solutions. There's a hack day that's taking place. For example, I say this, Rika. For example, I was phoned by an organization this morning that is responsible for helping young boys who've been solicited online and groomed. They have created a database of support organizations around the world, around the UK. My question to them was, would they present that database to the developers that are meeting at the Tomorrow Festival so that they could develop a solution and deliver it within one day, so those support organizations will be accessible from within a social networking environment to the young people who are directly affected by these sorts of issues. So I think there's a creative way that we can solve some of these issues, and it just takes us to commit to thinking outside the box, and that would be really helpful.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry for the short amount of time, Spiros, particularly after you travelled for such a long way. If you could briefly just explain a little bit about the challenges in terms of EU legislation and cross-border activities in some of the topics that we've discussed today. Sorry, in 5 minutes. I know that's like amazing, but...
I wish I could do, but after having listened to what has been said so far, I'm really quite puzzled. The assumption was that laws are in place and that it is a matter of enforcement. I doubt that. I doubt that there are laws. There aren't, I'm afraid. The phenomenon is extremely new, and it is developing. We don't master it. It is market-oriented. I repeat it, market-oriented. Citizens are on the defense, and the regulators are absent or fragmented. And this is, of course, an area where harmonization is needed. The European Commission is needed here. This is particularly an area where community law could and should play a role. It has not been the case so far. Privacy is not a field falling within community law. It is national matter. Despite that, there have been some efforts. Without wishing to speak about myself, I was the first to propose the first ever community measure for the protection of minors and of human dignity when I was in charge of audiovisual policy with the European Commission. Yet, this is not a binding measure. There have been more after that, 2 directives on the processing of data and a more recent one on the protection of personal data. Personal data, what does it mean? Anything related to a person. However, Google, for instance, denies that IP addresses form part of personal data. Regulators remain silent. Again, because they are probably puzzled with this phenomenon. There was a chance. There was a chance when the Commission examined the merging Google DoubleClick. The chance was that the law which was applicable was competition law, and competition law is the exclusive prerogative, let's say, of the Commission. To my view, this was a chance because the Commission could have said that the threat resulting from the largest ever database against citizens should have been taken into account when examining compatibility with competition rules. The reason being that the community policy is an integrated policy, not fragmented, and this dimension should have been taken into account. It hasn't been taken into account. The Article 29 Working Party issued recommendations, and I am puzzled when I see that they suggest, for instance, 6 months of duration for keeping confidential data or personal data in stock, in storage. Why 6 months? Why 1 day? Who said that? If it were a traditional means, it wouldn't be allowed. If the case of Graham was in a newspaper, the case would be very different. And still, Google denies to accept the 6 months. It rejects it, and it suggests 9 months without ensuring anonymization afterwards. I stop here.
Thank you very much to the panel. I'm very sorry that we don't have time for questions. Hopefully our panelists will be available at the end after tenure and Anthony's session for some general questions just over water and so on. I'd like, please show your appreciation for the panelists after having me rushing them through.